today.
Stand by, Liz. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now you're good.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, just some housekeeping reminders. This is a Microsoft Live Teams meeting. It's scheduled for 90 minutes. You're in listen-only mode. If you do have questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, and if we have time, we'll take questions at the end of the meeting. And please enter your name and region with your question. And finally, we will be recording this and posting it to the RC Care Toolkit office hours soon after the event. Here you can see our agenda. We're going to talk about the Back to Basics series. Then we're going to talk about the intake process, resources and tools, next steps, and any questions you may have. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Allison. Thank you.
Allison, we can't hear you.
I am. Yep, I have unmuted myself now. I think I unmuted and muted again. So here we go, back to the top. I think I need my own Back to Basics course for how to operate a Teams Live. So I wanted to take the opportunity to just again thank you for joining. This is our second session of the Back to Basics series. We had our first session a few weeks ago, and that was related to, it really talked about an overview of the client care program and introduced these Back to Basics sessions that we will be having. They are posted, the links to the recordings and the presentations are available. They're posted on the Exchange on our RC Care office hours page. Liz did mention that a couple of slides ago, and I know we'll mention again, so do check that out in time. So just a quick bit of what really these Back to Basics sessions or series is meant to touch on. We're designed to go back to those early days of client care when we first launched this a year and a half ago. We spent so much time focusing on the system, and rightfully so. It was brand new. We had to show you how to use it and what we do in the system. Our trainings and communication focused around the system, and that unfortunately meant that we sacrificed the fundamentals of client care and what that meant. So we're taking this opportunity to take a step back and go back to the basics. These sessions will be running about every 2 weeks with topics that we've thought out the topics ahead of time, but we have been leaving Okay. Sorry, distracted. Yeah. Can I get a confirmation that you all can hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good, thanks. I don't want to go through this a third time. All right, so taking the opportunity to go back to basics. Here we are. We're running these every 2 weeks with topics that have been pre-planned, but we've left some room for flexibility because we know that things happen. We know that disasters are not predictable, and there may be some other priorities that will cause us to shift. So that's why we haven't socialized too far in advance, so that we have that room again for some flexibility. And let's see here. All right, so you can see here some of the list of topics that we will be including. This session that you all have joined, and happy to have you here, is related to intake. We plan on having a session related to casework, and our IDC folks, our individual disaster care folks, are going to have a session. We plan on spending some time around the support functions, thinking about event review and our case administrators, perhaps even our RDO exception approvers, trying to spend some time with those functions and share some more pieces about the program. And then later on, we've got perhaps some user role conversations to talk about permissions, who can do what, that type of thing that we had some charts at the beginning, but it's shifted, it's changed over the last year and a half. You'll see a little bit of this next bullet later on in this slide, and we will reiterate that every time, but how to get help, some of the channels, but then also what does it mean to escalate something? So we've got some sessions planned around that. So we do plan on running these through the end of the year. And again, just being flexible, the announcements will go out, and we will share that across all of our channels. So that is a little bit about these series. So, but why are we deciding to do this now? Well, we continue to operate in this agile environment. We implement what we implement. We learn from what we implemented, and then we go back and we make changes. During this time, we're identifying things that perhaps aren't working properly, or some nuances or other elements that we need to account for. And those enhancements are occurring about every 3 weeks. So sometimes you'll see those little changes within the system, and that is happening roughly every 3 weeks, depending on things being approved. With this, we know that we're in this period where our posted doctrine that we posted a year and a half ago, or in the past year and a half, because we have done some updating, our doctrine and training doesn't necessarily match the functionality, and the program changes that we've implemented aren't updated in any of our doctrine or training. There's this lag in information. So we wanted to take the time now to go back and talk about some of those changes, some of what used to be and some of what we have now. We've learned quite a bit. We continue to learn every day, every hour, every minute. We've learned a lot since the launch and have made a number of changes. And we continue to evolve and change as we review all of the feedback, lessons learned, emails, other avenues of sharing information that you all have submitted and put forth or mentioned somewhere. So thank you to all of you who have helped us grow and perfect this program and system. As we continue to change our program and system, it does take a while to update everything. We're working on an exciting project here that will get information to you faster, in a more efficient manner, and in an easier location. And I'm talking about the knowledge base. If you haven't been there, you might want to check that out. But our knowledge base in RC Care allows us to quickly indicate or share changes to the system or procedure. We can quickly update or create an article and add that knowledge base article to the article area. We plan on leveraging the knowledge base while DCS continues to evaluate our training and doctrine and our path forward in that arena. We're pretty excited about the efforts in this knowledge base article project, essentially trying to take some of our system pieces out of our job tools and put them right into the knowledge base so that you can quickly find them and use those to help guide you through intake and other areas of RC care. And again, this is another reason why we wanted to take a moment and take the opportunity to do these back to basics series. There's a lot of information out there, whether it's a myth, a legend, or actually true. We know that some of our old program and our old DEAR system, CAS, sometimes is still referenced. So we want to put those to rest. We want to make sure our responders have the latest and greatest, and that's what we're trying to do here for you today. When we think about the client care team, program, group, we want to talk about it as wraparound services, just like this graphic is trying to show. We know a lot of times that financial assistance is what we talk most often about. We focus on it a lot. It is usually the first thing that is mentioned. It's because it's a difficult area, but we want to also talk about all of the services within client care that we provide to the clients. There's a whole lot more that is occurring for our clients, as you all know. And this graphic is meant to highlight and show all of those components to the client care activities. So you'll see here that our regional response and DAT is in a different color. It's highlighted up here in the upper left, and that is meant to just show that it once was a part of our client care activities, but it has shifted to its own branch. It's moved to its own branch under James Tittle and Jennifer Pippa. But it is an integral part of client care activities. So we just wanted to make sure that that was highlighted here, and we are very excited that this program will see the focus that it needs and deserves. So hopefully this kind of frames all of the services that we provide to our clients, from individual disaster care, client satisfaction, compliance and monitoring, all these things that are pieces and components of our client care activity. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn to Alicia.
Yes, thank you, Allison, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So what I'd like to ask you to do is, during this session today, is to not think so much about how to do things in RC Care, the system. There's opportunities for that, but instead, let's really think about it from the perspective of the client. So as you see in the diagram on the slide, the activity of intake begins when you first sit down with the client to assess their needs after the disaster. And this really is the first step in the client's journey to recovery. So next slide. So we will begin now to walk through the intake process from more of a programmatic perspective. Next slide, please. So a bit about intake and that intake process. As you all know, intake is that initial activity of creating a client record and case in the system of RC Care. It's designed to help the Red Cross gather the information we need to support a client's disaster cause needs. Anyone trained to work with clients and having access to RC Care, such as a DAT responder, a caseworker, IDC worker, or even a trusted and trained partner, can perform the intake in the system. And this process of intake may take us to the scene of the event, such as right after a home fire. It might be in a Red Cross office, perhaps it's at a multi-agency resource center, or even just over the phone and you're at home. National headquarters may even authorize application support over the phone using agents when we have very large-scale operations. And in those cases, often clients are directed to call the 1-800 Red Cross number to be connected to the client care center to complete the intake application. So when we refer to the intake process, we've basically broken down the process into 4 main steps or sections that we'll be going through today. The first is, of course, meeting that client for the first time and keeping clients at all times at the center of what we do, our decision making when we're with them. We want to make sure to ensure the service delivery is one of compassion and care and professionalism, that it's also culturally appropriate and equitable, and finally, that it follows current doctrine. The process also includes, as you know, collecting client information and determining program eligibility as we go through that information with the client. And finally, and when appropriate, providing assistance to clients using the RC Care system, that client relationship management system, and to create a client contact record and case. Next slide, please. So the types of cases that we have before we kind of get into the walkthrough of the process is most often, I think we will experience one in which we're providing financial assistance. So as you can see on the slide here, those financial cases are ones that are eligible due to the type of damage that the home has experienced, specifically destroyed, major, or uninhabitable damage classification. But in addition to that, the client must also express a need and accept the financial assistance that we're offering them. And even in the case of a financial assistance case, where resources and referrals can be offered to the client. The other case is the resource and referral cases. And these would be ones, for example, that are when you have the damage of minor affected or no visible damage when that assessment is done. Or it might be that just the client declines financial assistance. They may not feel they have a need for that, and that's of course okay. It's up to the client. So the intake worker will create the case in RC Care, and they can track everything from the referrals and the resources to the supplies that we provide. So we typically provide comfort kits and water, and we might have other things as well, such as the blankets, cleanup kits, and such. So let's go on to the next slide, please. Now we're going to really dive a bit deeper with you on the intake process. And that first step is, of course, meeting the client. So let's keep in mind that all individuals supporting the client care program are responsible for keeping clients at the center of your decision making. So again, client-focused services, but also ensuring that the services are, in fact, again, delivered with care and comfort and compassion. They're also delivered equitably and culturally appropriate, as mentioned before. And then once again, that we're following the doctrine and guidance that's provided. So let's move to the next slide. This is a bit of a review of the interview basics. You'll find this laid out in the doctrine for you, but just to take a couple minutes to talk about this. Because again, in the end, it's not the entry into the system is not the focus, but really the client. So making sure that we're setting a really appropriate tone for that interview, that it's professional, it's one that's that you are showing concern and comfort and calm. So what do we mean by that? So for example, using active listening, putting your attention fully to the client, that you're talking, with the client and not doing the talking. And that, again, this is not about, keyboard or the papers and all of that. So we want to attempt to remove, any distractions we can, including maybe turning your cell phone to vibrate. Encourage that client to tell their story, to learn of perhaps their top priorities after this disaster. Once again, we can't say it enough, but showing care and compassion and empathy, and really be mindful of the client's body language as well as your own. And I think this is one of the things that we may have to get used to again, given that over the last couple of years, we've been in a virtual environment. We've kind of lost some of that. It's harder to do that when you're just looking at a screen, particularly if it's a phone screen. But there's a really important part that can really tell you a lot. We also want to make sure we maintain client privacy and confidentiality, and always, as it relates to our own fundamental principles, that we remain impartial and neutral while supporting the client's recovery. Some of the other things around the comfort is, again, making sure that the client is comfortable in whatever location you provide and that there's privacy with that. Make sure also to respect the client's circumstances, their specific needs and concerns. There, again, may be some cultural factors that affect the needs of the client, and avoid making any assumptions. Please encourage the client independence by offering information and choices that bring the next step within their reach. And of course, as we talked about just previously, some of the things that we can do that are just small but are important nonetheless are offering maybe some water or a snack if you have it available. And finally, calm is, again, making sure that we're focused 100% on the client. Be patient, don't rush through the interview. Really take your time with the client. This is also going to serve you well when it comes time to putting the information in the system for intake. Be mindful of setting boundaries for the relationship as well, by not sharing your personal experience and not overstepping your boundaries with the client. So again, the focus is on the client and hearing that client's story. Finally, we want to just in brief collect the needed information, of course, that we need for the intake application. That means gathering the client information so that we can be best prepared for effective follow-up and recovery planning assistance. And a part of that initial conversation with the client is explaining Red Cross services, and that includes talking about our mission and our assistance. One thing I would like to point out here is about setting clear expectations. It really is important to ensure that the client understands clearly what to expect from the Red Cross. So let me give a couple of examples. As volunteers of the Red Cross, it is our goal to help you begin your path to recovery during this difficult time and to ensure that you are treated with respect and kindness. So that could be something that you actually say to the client. It's really important that they understand that is so important for us. We could also talk to them about the purpose of our program is to help support their immediate emergency needs and explain what those are, such as the food, the lodging, essential clothing, and that it's for, a very specific kind of timeline over the next couple of days while they begin to plan for their longer term recovery. So again, those are some examples, but again, as much as possible, setting clear expectations for our client when you have that first opportunity. Next slide. This will be familiar as well if you are already someone who does intake, and that is identifying the primary client and the household information. So just in brief, identifying the primary client is important for really establishing appropriate contact info for the case. And the household composition information will contribute perhaps to the number of cases that you open and also the amount of assistance available to the client. So without going through each of these, we encourage you to kind of take some time to review in the doctrine what each of these means. You know, the primary client, of course, is that representative for themselves and perhaps family members or other household members, and that they have a willingness to communicate on behalf of the household during their recovery and their time with the Red Cross, that they are willing to share personal information and they're able to make decisions about their recovery planning as well. So there's a really important things to make sure that it's clear who that primary client is. But there are these other things such as the household composition and who is planning to recover together, as well as share basic expenses after the disaster, as stated by the primary client. So when you're working with a large household, or maybe even multiple households who are sharing a pre-disaster housing unit, think about asking and make sure to ask about their recovery plan. Ask some questions that will help you to decide whether the clients and help them in their decision of who should be, how they should be assisted, whether it's one household and one case record and they're planning to recover together and share basic expenses, or more than one household where there or multiple primary clients and case records. You know, they may decide that even though they were living together, they've decided to recover separately, and that's more common, like with roommates, for example. Another one to keep in mind and understand is the non-resident primary client, and understanding that in this situation, there is no adult in the household that's available to serve as the primary client on a case. This individual may not reside in the pre-disaster home, but needs to be identified, and they need to be identified as the non-resident primary client. So there are some situations where this makes sense. So for example, when a child survives a deceased parent or guardian and no other adult lived in the home. But there are some other examples as well where this would be an appropriate thing for you to take note of. So again, make sure that you go through these. It's not a bad idea, depending on how often you're doing intake, to just refresh this in your mind so that at the time that you're meeting with the client, that you don't have to hesitate, but you have a very clear understanding of this. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz, who will take us through the next part of intake with collecting the information.
Thank you, Alicia. So let's take a look at the next part of the RC Care intake process. That's collecting client information. So we've met with the client, and after we've had that initial conversation and identify the primary client and the household composition, you can begin to collect the information to complete an intake application or to create a case record. And the RC Care system will guide you through the application as you enter that information from the primary client. This information includes, but is not limited to, their contact information, their phone number, their email address, and we also can take alternate contact information. Secondly, we want to be really clear on who is residing and list those household members when we create that case. And again, as we're listening to the client as they tell us their story, we're going to identify the immediate needs that that client may have, such as individual disaster care services. We may have a situation where our clients need disaster health services. So we want to make sure as we talk with that client and conduct our interview that we're identifying, those services that the client may need. We're also going to capture any items that may be provided to the client. That would be, as Alicia mentioned, if we provide comfort kits or blankets or vouchers for glasses, or if your region has gift cards. And I would like to just bring your attention to the reminder on the bottom. Just really take your time when you're entering that client information in RC Care and you have confirmation screens, best practices to read it back to the client to make sure we've got it correctly. If we put in the wrong information, it can delay the services to the client. So the information that we enter in this in our case record is going to drive the client's next steps, and it can be difficult to try and correct that information if it's not put in there correctly. Next slide, please. So as part of the intake process and creating that client record, every case that we create in RC Care is attached to a disaster event, specifying the event type. Typically, it's going to be a single family fire, but it could be other events, and also that event level. And events can be created before or during case creation, depending on the scenario. However, RC Care searches for existing events, and this allows you to attach a case or a group of cases to an already existing event. So we want to make sure if there are existing events that we attach them to that event so we don't have to make adjustments on the back end. So DAT responders and intake workers are able to create level 1 events. And again, that's the majority of the events we create, particularly of our DAT responders. However, in the event, if we have a level 2 or above event, that would have to be created in the console. But for today, we're primarily focusing on level 1 and 2 events. And during that event creation, RC Care will use address standardization, which is a process of formatting that address so that it matches the approved format of the National Postal Authority. And it can also accommodate non-traditional addresses for events and cases. For example, if there is no street address, it can look at cross streets. We can also have accommodate homes without a recognized address from the National Postal Authority. And also if there's temporary type addresses such as a mobile type resident, RV campers, tents, and other non-traditional type residential structures. Next slide, please. So after we've start that client record and we've entered the client information, the next step is to move through determining eligibility. And again, when we enter the client information and the Red Cross approves that application for the client care program, specific eligibility requirements have been met. So for most applications, the primary client provides information during that initial interview, and the RC Care system determines financial assistance and eligibility through an automated workflow. For some applications or case records, the primary client may need to provide documentation such as proof of identity or address or both. In these incidents, the review of documents is done with in-person DAT responders or virtually within the region. Next slide, please. So again, for determining eligibility, part of that process is our ID and address confirmations. And this is, there are several ways to do this. We have the automated third-party identity service, and this process can confirm the primary client's identity and address using consumer records. So if that client passes that first check through the third-party identity service, there's no need to request documents from the client. This will move the case forward to payment if all other eligibility criteria has been met, such as a detailed damage assessment and the client requests financial assistance. However, in some instances, the client does not pass that automated identity and address confirmations, so the primary client is going to need to provide proof of their identity and address. So on this screen, you can see several ways to confirm our client's ID and address. On the left column, all the documents listed, and I'm not going to read through them all, are acceptable for ID and address confirmation. So if our clients have any of these listed documents, or the ID and address is confirmed by a landlord, property manager, neighbor, or relative, then that can be is accepted for ID and address confirmation. However, during a virtual response, we cannot use a landlord, property manager, neighbor, or relative for confirmation of ID and address. In that situation, you would have to either dispatch 2 DAT responders to the scene, or confirm that ID and address using the documents on the next 2 columns. So if the client does have the ID and address documents, then they're good to go that we have listed in that first column. So next we move to identification only. So if our client does not have any of the documents listed on the left, for identification, we can use a passport, permanent resident card, military ID, or other government ID. In that case, you're also going to have a document to confirm that address. And on the far right, you can see those documents that are acceptable for confirming address. So I just want to make the distinction that on the left, those documents will confirm the client's ID and address, and then the 2 columns on the right, you would have to use for ID and address. And again, a 2 responder confirmation of identity and address is the easiest way to complete this confirmation. If we only have 1 responder doing these confirmations, it may require the client to upload documents and have a second worker review those documents for confirmation. And again, if identity and address is not confirmed by 2 Red Cross workers, clients are only eligible to receive immediate assistance until the documents are reviewed and approved. Next slide, please. So let's look at event confirmation. The preferred and best approach is to have 2 qualified DAT responders available to interact with the client and the case. This enables automatic confirmation of the event when you have 2 responders on the case. There's a reminder that when a worker is entering their token, that means they are attesting to the facts of the case are true and correct to the best of their knowledge. So again, the 2 possible methods for event confirmation are those 2 responders on the scene doing the confirmations, the event confirmation, the ID and address confirmation. And in the event of sharing that token, they are affirming that they indeed interacted with the case and interacted with the client. And on the right, if we have 1 responder, it will require the event reviewer to confirm the event afterwards. So again, the easy peasy path is 2 responders on the scene. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take an opportunity just to cover some virtual response reminders. Even if we are conducting a virtual response when appropriate, there's still the 2 responder requirement in place for every client and case interaction. And when I say case interaction, we may have 1 responder on the ground, or and the other one virtually. So we have 2 responders with RC Care Intake Access, working with that client and conducting the client intake. So again, and finally, within our program guidelines, there's no difference between that virtual in-person response, as far as we want to make sure all those confirmations for ID and address and the detailed damage assessment are fully documented in RC Care. And just a reminder, be sure to select the yes to the question, is this a virtual response? You can find that in the drop-down menu during the intake process before you click on next. And again, if we have that 1 responder, we have 1 virtual responder, we're going to have the client will have to upload documents. And again, we want to, for the easiest client service, again, having those 2 responders interacting on that case is the best way to go. Next slide, please. So a couple of others covered some of this. Again, that second responder has to fully interact with the client in the case to be considered a second responder within RC Care. And as we said earlier, we want to understand that entering a token is the same as providing an electronic signature that confirms your personal interaction with the case. And to not interact with the case and enter your token would be a violation of Red Cross procedures. And if it's found that a token is to be associated with a fraudulent case, the responder will be open for questioning. So we just want to highlight that a little. It's important just to keep in mind. So if you're not interacting with that case and someone asks you, hey, can I send you a token as a second responder, you don't want to do that, again, if you have not interacted with the case. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the detailed damage assessment, but I would note that in our next upcoming back to basic office hours, we'll dig a little deeper into the detailed damage assessment. But I did want to cover the purpose of the detailed damage assessment. And again, that detailed damage assessment, we talked about identity and address confirmations. The detailed damage assessment is required so we can understand the extent of the client's damages, because this will communicate the extent of the client's needs as they're assessed during the intake process. And providing, it also provides detail around the client's situation, including the damage, which helps clients to for our referrals to appropriate resources and referrals. So, for example, if a house is a total loss, we know the clients have lost everything, right? But we may have a situation where there's water damage, or the home may be uninhabitable, but clothing was not destroyed. So that may not be the primary need for that client. It may be shelter until they can get back into their residence, or they may have other services such as transportation needs if they have to relocate somewhere else. So again, the detailed damage assessment consists of 6 classifications, and those are destroyed, major, uninhabitable, minor, affected, and no visible damage. And as Alicia mentioned earlier, financial assistance depends on the detailed damage assessment, and clients would be eligible for immediate assistance based on a damage classification of major, destroyed, or uninhabitable. I just wanted to point out as well that our detailed damage assessment should be conducted from the exterior of the home. We do not enter a home to conduct the DDA. And also, more importantly, regardless of the DDA, the client would be eligible for financial assistance for IDC, that's disaster mental health, disaster health services, disaster spiritual care, shelter resident transition, or mass casualty financial assistance, regardless of the damage classification. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. All right, so talking about providing financial assistance. I know when I opened this, we said that we tend to talk about financial assistance all the time. Well, it is a component of our services. So, and I do think it's important that you know all of the options that are available to our clients. So with this, I'm not going to read it word for word, but this gives a nice overview of the options that are available. This is what we opened with RC Care. We've got our Walmart Direct to Cash, where clients can pick up their funds at a Walmart. We've got a MasterCard Send, where funds are sent right to their debit card. PayPal, if you have a PayPal account, you can have those sent right into the PayPal account, and then those funds can be sent wherever that individual would like. We've got Zelle, where a client registers through their bank and is able to move money through through the Zelle app. They're able to move money that way. And then our Old Faithful, the client assistance card, which is always available as a payment option. I think the updates here that I'd like to share, as we all know, hopefully that MasterCard Send currently has been turned off. It is not an option for us right now. And then there is Zelle as well. That is an option, but only for anything that has been created within any event that has been created within the console. So if you create an event with it during intake, Zelle is not available. It's also available for anything, any of our additional services like individual disaster care or supplemental events. So that is some of the updating with Zelle and MasterCard Send that I've got around the payment options. So again, just good to have some visibility on all of these potential pieces for our clients. And I believe I'm going to turn it over to Alicia.
Yes, thank you, Allison and Liz. So this slide really is about bringing it all together, kind of wrapping up and sharing some reminders and some tips as well for you that involve the intake process and really being diligent on the work that we do as we are meeting with the client. So first and most important, you heard at the beginning, me talking about the focus of our service delivery is on the client, and that at all times we really try to express, care and comfort and calm and concern and compassion. We could go on with all those C words, right? But they are so important to the experience that a client has as we are working with them as the Red Cross. So that leads to that second point about providing excellent customer service. We want to make sure that we convey kindness and respect and that compassion at all times on what may be the darkest day that this person has experienced. I think I may have briefly touched upon adherence to our fundamental principles, of which there are 7. There are definitely ones that stand out and are important in terms of guiding the decisions that we make as we're helping our clients. So for example, impartiality means that our services are based on their needs. It doesn't matter, what language they speak, where, what kind of house they may have been living in, what color skin they have, any of those things, it doesn't matter. To be impartial means that we're going to focus on their needs, their disaster cause needs. So the fundamental principles are really just not principles, but they truly are tools that can help us and guide the work that we do every day. We can't say it enough. There certainly is a lot of guidance and doctrine out there. We acknowledge that, but at the same time, it's important to read it, to understand it, and most importantly, to follow the standards and procedures that have been developed. Why? Because this ensures consistency regardless of where we are. So whether you're in California or a remote village in Alaska or somewhere else, we can be sure when we follow that guidance that we are providing consistent services to our clients. I think Liz may have touched on this as we were talking about intake, is take your time. Again, know that you're having a conversation with the client. You don't need to rush through. Trust your gut, as you're talking with the client as well. But again, there's no record to set here in terms of how quickly you finish up. Take the time that the client needs to be able to tell their story. And then finally, it's okay, and it's really encouraged to check your work. Double check, ask the client, to double check with spelling of names, emails, phone numbers. It's so easy. I know personally, when I'm typing, to switch numbers around and all that kind of thing. So again, take your time and make sure, because that's going to help you to make it a smooth experience, not only for the client, but for you as well. Next slide, please. So we wanted to take a few minutes to share some of what we call the support for doing intake, in no particular order, but if we go to the next slide, one of the more recent things that has become available to the regions is the intake trainee, what we're calling actually the expedited DAT trainee training path. And essentially what this means, it's giving an option of following the traditional training path to become a service associate, or if you follow this expedited training, it's shortening at the front end the amount of training you need to take so that you can become that second responder on the case more quickly. So again, it allows DAT trainees RC Care intake access with some limitations, but to become that second responder, to receive that token and be able to help complete those confirmations of ID, address, and damage. This role does not have access to the intake form itself. So again, as I mentioned, there are some limitations to it intentionally, because the DAT trainee is not a forever position. The DAT trainee is one that is exactly as the name states. It's one where you're learning the ropes, you're learning your job, and certainly you're encouraged while you have 6 months to complete all the training requirements and such. We would hope and expect that folks would want to do it even more quickly than that, maybe in 3 months instead. There is a doctrine bulletin that covers this expedited DAT trainee training path that gives more information on what this is about. And with respect to RC Care, we have developed an intake trainee user role. So again, by having that user role, you're able to access, these trainees are able to access to become that second responder and do the things that I just described. So take a look at that bulletin. That's where you can find the information. And certainly let us know if you've got any questions about that. Next slide, please. So it's important to know, and if I were you, or if I had this, I would just print this out probably and stick it near my desk. But this is one of providing you with the different support channels, depending on what your needs are. So I won't read through all of this, but if you can kind of glance at it, you'll see that the first line of support is often going to be your own supervisor. This can be especially important if you've got programmatic questions. Maybe you are having some casework issues, again, depending on what your role is, but go first to your supervisor. May be the most appropriate first step. We have the DAT intake hotline, which of course is for our DAT responders. That's available at all times, day and night, around the clock and every day of the year. And don't forget about your application leads, whether it's for RC Care or even RC Respond, depending on what your needs are. They're there. They've been trained to assist you in your region. And if you don't know who that person is, I would encourage you to reach out and find out and become friends, so you can work and help each other. So again, I won't go through the rest of these, but know that you can access things on the exchange through the different toolkits. Again, we don't have an exhaustive list here, but a lot of what's here, what you need is on the RC Care Toolkit. Certainly if it's DAT specific, it's on the DAT Toolkit as well, or any of the other program toolkits. Again, make sure that you visit those. The next slide, please. So just 2 days ago, we had our most recent RC Care release, and we wanted to share the ones, particularly the ones that are relevant for intake workers. So let me just run through those real quick. But keep in mind that every week there is an email with updates to the field that you can subscribe to. In addition, they are posted within a knowledge base article in RC Care. So one is that during intake, the cancel button has been removed, and they added some informational text to the consumer record check results screen. So we'll see this. We have a screenshot we'll show in just a second here, but this will help prevent users from misclicking on the screen, because we found that that was a common issue. Another one that I think is going to be, we've heard that's going to be extremely, or is being well received, is a case comment field called Situational Awareness. This has been added to the summary page after intake has been completed. The intake worker can leave a brief comment, and we encourage you for it to be brief, not a long, going on and on for paragraphs, but really a brief comment for caseworkers in the field. So this is going to be one of the ways that the caseworkers who are doing that recovery planning, doing that follow-up with the client, that they can, and as well as the IDC workers, they can have a sort of a heads up of some key priorities that you may have noted that when you've met with the client. The field has the same properties as all the other case comments, so it will show up in the case feed. So in other words, it's same as if the intake worker had logged into the case to leave a comment. So you can still do that. You can still go into the case and do so, but this is going to expedite it for those intake workers, if you would like to do it this way instead. The question, does client need financial assistance? That field in immediate assistance or mass casualty services will now always be filled in. There was actually a bug in the system that was preventing the answer from intake being stored onto that particular service, and that has now been fixed finally. So that's another big one. And then finally, when a client's condition is noted as hospitalized, the system will now no longer automatically create an ICCT IDC service. Instead, it will create a DHS, Disaster Health Services IDC service. So again, that was based on, again, feedback that we received, as well as all these others as well, on what we were hearing from all of you in the field. So if we go to the next slide, we'll show you that screenshot of that confirmation info page where that cancel button has been removed. Again, there's some additional information there that's now you can see on the screen. And the main thing that it's going to do is prevent you from trying to click on it and nothing's happening there. If we go to the next one, we also have a screenshot of that situational awareness field that is now available on the summary page at the end of the intake process. Again, it's intended to be for brief comments that you can leave for those who are going to be doing follow-up with the client. And it will, once again, it will appear in the case feed, just as if you went into the case and made the comment. Next slide, please. So here is, again, it's not an exhaustive list where we'd have to have several slides probably, but we do have some key resources noted here that helped inform the presentation today. That includes the client care program intake process standards and procedures, as well as the in-person virtual DAT response tactics job tool, the detailed damage assessment job tool, and the doctrine bulletin on the expedited DAT trainee training path. We've noted also the toolkits, but again, if you have something specific to a particular, another program, such as one of the IDC programs, certainly you could go to their toolkits as well. Finally, it's not linked here, but just a reminder and an encouragement to connect with your application leads for RC Care and RC Respond. What will that do? It's going to give you access to reports and dashboards and lots of information that can help you overall and kind of have better situational awareness of what's happening in your region. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Liz to finish us out.
Thank you, Alicia. So let's talk about next steps. Next slide, please. So as Allison mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we will continue to have these back to basic sessions. And the next session is scheduled for June 30th. And in that session, we're going to cover the detailed damage assessment. And again, these sessions will run through the end of the calendar year. So look forward to an announcement for our July sessions and the topics we'll be covering. And finally, you can access these presentations if you go to the RC Care Toolkit and then click on the RC Care office hours. So we hope to have this presentation posted, if not by the end of this week, early next week. So if you want to share with your teams. So now we're going to open it up for questions. So if you have any additional questions we have, and thank you, Jamie, so much for keeping up with the questions and the great answers you're providing. So let's go ahead and take some questions. If you do have any question, please enter your name and region and your question in the Q&A. So yeah, go ahead, Leonard.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to run through some of these unless you want to take it, Liz.
No, go ahead, Leonard. Thanks.
Cool. All right. So just one quick question as we circle back on the confirmations. Just to mention gathering the contact information for the person who's confirming the ID and address. So when we're doing those, neighbor, relative, landlord, or fire EMA confirmations, gathering that contact information. I don't know who wants to add just a little more flavor about what type of information we might want to collect when we're doing those types of, using those types of confirmation sources.
Well, in the case of an emergency official, we would want to get their agency, their badge number, their name, and their telephone number. And if we are using a landlord or a relative, we want to get all complete contact information and enter that into RC Care.
Cool. Thanks, Liz. And a question from Flo Hankin, who just wants to get a sense of what are some examples of what you would put in the case comment box? What's some detail or information that would be helpful? Why would you use that case comment box?
Yeah, thanks.
I could start. Yeah, so let's say, for example, that the family lost a pet in the fire. There's not necessarily a specific place other than the one case comment field in at the very beginning, and you may not have learned that yet, right? When you're talking with the client. So, they might have, let's say they have a child or that even themselves, they're very distraught about having lost their pet. That would be something that would be really helpful for perhaps the disaster mental health worker to be able to know that they might benefit from having a conversation if they agree with the disaster mental health worker. So that's one I know that comes to mind often. People don't always think about, but pets are like kids to many of us, and so I think that one could be I think a common example of one that would be helpful to include. Liz, would you like to add any other examples?
No, I would just point out that anything that will help that caseworker, information that would be helpful to that caseworker when they pick up the phone to call that client, so they're not caught unawares around perhaps a significant need of the client, or anything that may inform them as they work with that client on their recovery plan.
All right, we do not have any more pending open questions. So gang, if you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A. Please make sure you put your name and your region as you submit that, and we will answer it when you enter it. Just to follow up on the case comment box, somebody posted that some of the comments that the caseworkers would like are whether or not they have insurance, where they're staying, did they lose everything, and what's kind of their clothing situation, did they lose pets, as you guys indicated, things like that. So yeah, I think just adding some of those details, and while we don't necessarily need to resort back to the old narratives, providing some of that specific detail would be helpful so that that caseworker could read and get a sense of what the client's circumstance is as they reach out and do that follow-up and recovery planning.
Yeah, and this is Alicia. I was just going to add, there could be other things like no family in the area. Maybe they don't have any close relatives that live near them, because we know that could be an important support after a disaster as well. Even in terms of the disaster, if the fire was limited to the kitchen, let's say, then again, it may not be so much a need for replacing clothing, but certainly knowing how to get smoke out of clothing would be really important. So, things like that, anything that as that caseworker is doing follow-up and doing referrals, that will help them, to get that conversation started with the client.
That's good, Alicia. So we got another question that came in. Will there be an update to the intake worksheet to make it follow the application more exact? And I'll take a stab at this, and you guys feel free to weigh in. The intake worksheet is designed to be used when the responder, when the DAT, the intake worker, doesn't have the ability to enter the information directly into RC Care. and just to be able to take that information. And we're limited by an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, both sides in this case. And while we have created the form in sections that are close to the actual intake flow, we're never going to get it exact, gang. The whole purpose of it is to get the information we need when the responders aren't able to enter the information directly into RC Care. So are we going to be able to do a question by question? Probably not. We probably need a couple of pages in order to do that. So what I would ask is to, just be patient with us and do the best you can with it. And quite frankly, if there's other resources out there that you feel are more appropriate, nothing wrong with that. The intake worksheet is a resource for you. It doesn't meet your needs, and you've got another intake worksheet that works better for you. No issues with you using that. So that's my stab at it. Alicia, Liz, I don't know if y'all have any other thoughts on that.
No, nothing to add, Leonard. Thank you.
And then Leonard, I do see the other question in the Q&A, and I did just want to sort of touch on it. Someone else had asked earlier in the Q&A about the capture button on intake, and I pointed out that yes, that still exists. I want to be clear. That is when you are doing your confirmations for intake. So if you're a single responder and you're out with a client and they did not pass the consumer record check, so they're showing you their driver's license and it matches their address and their date of birth and that stuff. The capture button exists on the intake form so that you can click the capture button, take a photo of that ID, and it uploads it to RC Care. It does not store it on your phone. It goes straight into the system and straight into the queue so that a document reviewer can approve it. That is the quickest way, if you are on a single person response, to get the client fully confirmed. Then the client doesn't have to do any sort of uploading documents. You don't have to send them links so that they can try to figure out later on. It is simple. It's right there. It's a document you've seen. It's a good document. It's you've verified it. So it should get through the approval process relatively quickly. I want to make sure, because I want to make sure we're stressing it, because I don't think everyone doing intake knows that they have that option available to them. But it is very important that you use that capture button. We are not permitted to just take photos of any client's information and documents on our phones and store them on our phones. If you use that capture button, that functionality specifically does not save it on your device and saves it within RC Care so that it is protected and it cannot be stolen, and you don't have something on your phone that you shouldn't, and we're protecting the client's information. So just wanted to stress that difference, that it isn't, you shouldn't complete intake and then, take a picture of their ID and try to get it onto RC Care yourself. That is not secure, and it actually will just delay things for the client. But if you are an intake and you have the capture button, go ahead, use it. It will make things a lot easier for yourself and the client. So just wanted to quickly clarify that little bit of a point, just in case there is some miscommunication.
Great, thanks for doing that, Jamie. So there's another question that just came in, and I'll address it. Is there a similar effort to streamline the training for recovery caseworkers, such as that's been done for DAT? This program also suffers from program changes not reflected in the training or doctrine, and I think we agree. I think that's why we're doing these back to basics. I think I take you back to the beginning of this presentation as to the rationale behind the back to basics, and also if you go to the RC Care office hours page on the exchange, you can check out the last back to basics, which really introduces the dilemma that we're in with our system enhancements, why we're doing the back to basics, and what we're doing about it moving forward. So we recognize that there is some there is some inconsistency. Perhaps the information is not congruent between the system functionality and what our posted training and doctrine is. We recognize we've gone through some program changes as well. And the reality is we will continue to do so. So I'd just ask that you go back, check out that opening back to basic session on the RC Care office hours page on the Exchange. Review that. Hopefully that gives you a little more context as to why we're doing these back to basic sessions. And then I would just ask for a little latitude and patience as we continue to work with all of our partners in disaster cycle services to develop a doctrine and training strategy that's going to be more relevant and useful for the field. And you will start to see a lot of our tools and resources synchronize with that effort. So stay tuned with that, but check out that previous office hours. Hopefully it'll give you a little more detail and context around why we're doing the back to basics. And I don't have any other pending questions. Once again, if you got a question, please put your name and your region and submit the question through the Q&A, and we will answer your questions as we get them. So just to circle back on some of the training requirements and how responders get the gaps that they need. Kathleen Ennis just indicates that while we are trying to streamline some of our training and doctrine, we recognize that there is a path to get all of the recovery training. And again, as part of our training and doctrine strategy, some of our simplified DCS work, you'll see perhaps a shorter path to get the information and content you need in order to get to the certain gaps you're looking for, or to get the information you need. So just stay tuned. We recognize that there is a significant training path, and we have to balance. We have to balance, trying to get relevant information to the field. What we hear is that we've got one camp that tells us our training is too much, and then we have another camp that tells us that our training doesn't provide the right information. So we have to find that delicate balance, and we're working on that strategy, gang. We're trying to ensure that, again, we relay the appropriate information that's needed for the field. And I think a great opportunity, Alicia, to talk about some of our soft skill elements of what we're trying to infuse in our training moving forward.
Yeah, I could certainly mention kind of a project initiative that is going on right now. Is one of the things that we've heard about is over a great period of time, and that we've talked about at the beginning of this session just a bit, was really all about the soft skills that are such an important part of being able to have that caring and compassionate conversation with the client. So through a joint effort of disaster cycle services and services to the armed forces, there's a task force kind of working on identifying some resources. These would not be required trainings, and in fact, they're kind of different formats. So it might be just a written resource, or it might be a video, or it might in fact be a training. But the idea is not to start adding a whole lot more required trainings, but really to provide some additional resources on something we know can really make a difference for people. And so the group is focusing at the moment on trainings available through Precipio. If you're not familiar with Precipio, it's another outside of trainings you find in Edge. There are trainings and whatnot in Precipio. Just type it into the Exchange search bar. Scipio, CIPIO for Scipio. And you'll be able to find out more information about that. But we are working on, the group is working on identifying kind of the top resources that focus on the different types of soft skills. And then in the near future, that will become available on the exchange. If that's something that you or those that you work with, those that you supervise are interested in that. So more to come as we get closer to having those available, but we're really excited about this. And again, it serves not just for our disaster clients, but our military, families, those that are served through the services to the armed forces as well.
We have no pending questions right now in Q&A.
Okay, well, with that, we'll wrap it up. I just want to thank everyone for your time. And again, give us some time to post the recording on the RC Care Toolkit on the office hours section. We'll make sure that's out there so you can have access to that. And again, we appreciate everything you do and working with our clients and making sure we give them the best service that we can. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.